How's going, guys? Welcome to the channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto was the immortal sage of the dead and built Harem in HOTD. Huge shout out to Methos QB777 for this story. If you wants to see awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into the video. I still don't know how it happened, but it was after that fight that we started out as friends with benefits. After a few weeks, we became an actual couple, the blonde said, as he glanced to the candle he had grabbed when he first started his story. It was nearing half done, and the flickering flame gave enough light to cast a sorrowful shadow on the shrine statue. Naruto hated such lighting. We helped each other, but in the end it wouldn't matter. Just like Yugao, she was killed while pregnant, barely even getting to the second trimester. Naruto sighed, and fell silent for a few moments. I was the one to end her life. Madara had somehow found a way to use what was called the Kodo Amatsukami, and turned a third of the alliance. Yuna was one of them. Naruto grabbed another cigarette, lighting the tobacco with a small bit of fire chakra. With 4 of our 5 leaders being killed by our turned allies, I was promoted to field commander, and a few weeks later, I had to step up and take full command. The Raikage was killed by a resurrected Mu, the Night-Inked Sasuke. Naruto scoffed after a moment. It didn't matter if I had command, as a few weeks later came the final battle. Fighting may have picked up just before, but on that battlefield, it was hopeless. Naruto took a drag from his cancer stick, allowing the smoke to fester in his lungs, before releasing it. That battle was long, and while I was powerful, I couldn't even get close to beating the strongest of the Uchiha. Kakashi-sensei, in a desperate gamble, used the Kamui. I was sent through either time, space, or dimensions, and ended up in the very park I torched earlier, Naruto said with a low chuckle at the end. I am certain that time was displaced, because I had fought for 2 days when Kakashi decided to send me off. That was in September, but I had arrived in the middle of July. Naruto took another drag, and sighed afterwards. My time in this world was a lot better, though I still can't say that the war was as bad as this. Or Project 1. He then gazed back at Siko. At least in terms of loss of life. Siko moved close enough to rest her head on his shoulder. Naruto-kun, what was Project 1? She asked, feeling like he would answer, though she would have to wait. Almost as bad as this, but I'll explain when we get back to the others, he said, and then turned to her. You should get some rest, Siko-chan. We'll have to leave after the sun rises. He felt her nod, though she didn't move away. He wrapped his left arm around her shoulders, and felt her begin to doze off. He smiled slightly, and decided to let her sleep like that. Though he sighed and whispered, the truth of my past. My journal is extremely exaggerated, maybe I should rewrite the damn thing? He then allowed his eyes to close. When do you think young Naruto-kun will contact us, Kira-chan? The voice of an elderly man asked from behind a curtain. The room was a traditional styled study, and the window the elder looked out of showed a Zen garden. Hopefully soon, Lord, came the voice of a woman that wore combat gear resembling Umbu grade. The woman, named Kira, had dark green eyes and auburn-colored hair. She was, what many would consider, average for an American, though she was born and raised in Kyoto. Her gear was new, as the Hayabusa had just started using it. The Emperor of Japan sighed as he gazed out into his garden. The palace was secured by many things, though the greatest was a nearly invisible barrier. He smiled as he remembered when Naruto had put that up. Because of the barrier, many were safe from what was happening, though he grimaced when he thought of the numbers. We saved as many as we could, though I still don't think it was enough, he whispered. He then turned to the Japan-born American. Could you get a hold of him, as soon as possible? Kira nodded. I will make the call in 2 hours. The Emperor smiled at the 36th Hayabusa member. Arigato, Kira-chan. When you are finished speaking with him, you may get in touch with young Hanzo-kun. I am certain that you are worried for your future husband, he said in a gentle tone. The woman's cheeks tinted pink a little, but bowed. Arigato, lord, she said before turning to leave. She knew that the Emperor was distraught over the current happenings in the world, and decided to go and make some tea to soothe his thoughts. The Emperor watched as his guard left to make tea. He sighed, and then turned his weary gaze back outside. Either the gods are angry, or something else is at play here, he thought as he turned to his desk. Sitting on the center of the desk was a folder. It was thick, and had seen better days, as though someone had opened and read from it a lot. In bold red lettering it was Lab-Led Project 1, Black Eden, The Hive. Rei sighed as she gazed out of the window in Saya's room. The two girls along with Yuki were sitting around Saya's table, and had been talking for a while, though Rei barely paid attention. She kept her gaze towards the nearby park that was still smoking. It was already 1 a.m, and she was slightly worried. She watched as the moon slowly shifted in the sky, heading on its way down. She then turned when Saya spoke directly to her. "They'll be fine. They are the top 2 students in the Kendo Club, and since Naruto-kun is a Hayabusa member, one would think that he'd have no problems." Rei smiled sadly, and turned back to the window. "I know. But I can't help it," she said, rubbing her left arm. Yuki sighed, catching the worry in Rei's tone. "Honestly, we've seen him in action. Plus he's a ninja, right? You'd think he could handle more than some slow-ass zombies." She then turned back to Saya. "You know, you all never told me how you guys know each other so well," she said curiously to the rosette. Saya sighed as she decided to explain. "Rei and I have actually known each other for a couple of years. Siko-senpai we've known since Rei joined the Kendo Club. Rei and Siko-senpai met Naruto-kun in a match back in late August. He defeated both Hisashi and Rei, before turning to the captain of the Kendo Club. It wasn't even a close match, as he had nearly destroyed Siko in the fight. I was watching from the stands, and the way he fought then was crazy. I thought that he was just skilled in fighting, but a few months later was the placement exams for the 2nd semester. He scored higher than me," she said as she gazed at her bookshelf. Yuki whistled as she heard the last part. "Damn, the only one who even got close to beating you in academics was Siko-san. I'm guessing that you had gotten curious about who had beat you. Either that or jealous." Saya nodded to the girl, and blushed. "I was extremely curious and had asked the exam sensei who had beat me. He told me that it was Uzumaki Naruto." Saya then turned back to Rei. "It was Rei that introduced me to him. I was surprised that the guy who beat me was also the one who beat Rei and Siko-senpai." She finished explaining, and turned to gaze back at her books. All of them were textbooks that covered courses that went up to college level. Yuki grinned as she thought about the blonde. "Kyoko-sensei introduced me to him in September. He was helping her out, and came into Shido's classroom while my class was there. When I first saw him, I thought that someone had ordered a god. He was extremely sexy." She blushed slightly, thinking about the first time they had met. Saya turned to Yuki and asked, "Speaking of which, what happened to those rumors about you? The ones from when the year began?" Yuki's smile dropped, and she turned her gaze away from the other two. "Naruto-kun put a stop to that. Shido's group of ass-kissers started them, just because I didn't want to date any of them. It was missable before Naruto-kun beat the hell out of them after school. I think Kyoko-sensei told him about it," she said, rubbing her arms, and remembering the brief time that everyone at school had treated her like a slut. "I had walked by after talking to Kyoko-sensei, and saw him beating them away from the gym. After that he told them to not start false rumors about anybody." I blushed at the authority in his voice and almost laughed when Shido came out to help them. The dick was screaming at Naruto-kun until he smacked Shido. I was surprised when Shido was thrown a few meters from the force of it. Yuki then looked back at them. Rei was now paying attention. "It was that day that I started liking him," Yuki finished. Rei nodded, knowing about all of that. She had seen the event as her father had came to pick her up. "I had always known that those rumors weren't true. Anything said by Shido's group should be taken with a pound of salt," Rei said just before turning back to the window. They all started thinking about Naruto, before Saya stood. "We should probably get some rest. I'm certain that Naruto-kun will be back in the morning." The two nodded to her as they turned to go, heading to the rooms they were given to rest in. Saya then laid down, while still looking out the window, not even knowing that her father stood outside her door. Watching as she finally fell asleep, though he could tell it would be a restless one. Is the Emperor right about you, Namikaze? He asked mentally, before turning to leave, his destination the line of trucks they were getting ready to use to pick up supplies. Do you think he'll be able to really save enough people, enough that humanity can rebuild? Hanzo asked Jack and Rika. Jack opened his eyes looking toward the driver, while Rika drank a beer. All three were sitting in Death's Reckoning, next to the jeep that Hanzo had been working on previously. Hanzo also carried a beer, and looked to be in deep thought. If anyone can do it, Boss would blow their attempts out of the water, the bandaged man replied. He's holding back a lot. If you two would have seen him in Germany, then you would know. That guy is like taking the greatest superheroes you could think of, and jacking them up on massive amounts of steroids. The man chuckled at the end of his words. Rika giggled, and Hanzo laughed as they all turned to look at the mansion's main gate. Watching as one of the undead tried to walk through it, Rika sighed. Who would have thought that this could happen? She asked, though it seemed to be more towards herself than the others. Life is just strange like that. It'll always throw a twister at you, when you least expect it. Honestly, I think it's just the Earth's way of saying she's pissed at us. Jack replied, and opened the small fridge next to him. Grabbing a beer himself, he sat down at the small table they had set up and opened it. Hanzo nodded, thinking about his lover that was protecting the Emperor of Japan. Makes sense, he said as he drank his bottle, just finally realizing that it was almost empty. Rika sighed as she went to grab 2 more bottles. I'm worried. In the past 3 months, Naruto-kun somehow stole my heart. I can't help but worry about him. Jack hummed in a way that said he understood. That man seems to have that power. He can make the staunchest of allies out of his worst enemies. That Madara guy was truly insane to not see that, even with his powerful eyes. Jack said before thinking again. Of course, I doubt that everyone would actually do that. There are some people that just can't be forgiven. Hanzo nodded again, before asking a question that Rika also wanted an answer to. Hey Jack, don't you have any family out there? The man seemed to slump, and sighed. I have a daughter. But she thinks I am dead, he replied. My wife died in a car accident when my daughter was barely 4 years old, so she doesn't remember much of her. Taka was the love of my life, and we were both happy when Mira was born. The day we lost her, I almost gave up. Hanzo and Rika bowed their heads, feeling guilt for asking such a question. Hanzo himself knew what it was like to lose his parents, and Rika's were not on the best of terms with her. They allowed the silence to embrace them, and continued drinking. Naruto walked through the familiar sewer system that once held Kurama. He appeared to be taking a leisurely stroll. Where did I put it this time? He asked himself, as he made his way through the maze that was his mindscape. The twists, turns, and intersections of the place were familiar to him now. He had once thought of changing it to be like the old Konoha, but decided against that. He paused for a moment and looked to his left, down another long corridor that stretched into the darkness. There it is. He turned and walked into the darkness, though he could see just fine. As he walked through the passageway, he heard the hum of his darker counterpart. It was nearly as familiar to him now as Kurama's voice had been. So, here you are at last. Did you come to remind me that I was right? Or are you here to gloat? The rasping voice spoke as Naruto reached a throne room. The water of the maze wasn't present in this room, and his dark side was sitting on the throne, appearing to be bored, with its head relaxed and placed in its own left hand. Its red eyes were glazed with boredom, but a small spark could be seen in them. I take it that you are comfortable in that chair? Naruto asked. The being chuckled before summoning another throne beside it. You'd be surprised at how comfy these things really are, the darker one replied. Come and sit. There is something that we must speak about. Naruto nodded, and started to walk up the stairs leading to the thrones. Although there was no light in the place, both could see perfectly. It is about these dreams, I'd imagine. Right? The blonde whose eyes glowed just slightly purple asked his counterpart. Although I was originally looking for something else. You have it, don't you? His words were cold to the dark being, but the two were already familiar with the reason for it. But of course. How else can I get you to converse with me these days? You seem to think that I am the one causing such nightmares, but I assure you that it is not I. The normal blonde nodded as he sat down. The two couldn't lie to each other. They both gazed ahead, either seeming to wish to break the calm that had settled in the room. The two sat there, for what seemed like hours, just listening to the silence in the room. Naruto didn't even appear to be thinking, and the Dark One still appeared to be bored. Naruto sat with his right leg over the other, and his hands in his lap while slouched back against the throne. I already know what you want to say, Yami. But the question is, what can we do about all of it? The blonde spoke finally. His words were still cold, and sounded as though he were casually talking about the weather in monotone. Yami hummed in thought, as the look-alike opened its eyes again. The blood-red Rinnegan that it posses barely even looking at its surroundings. Just glancing at the back of its hand. That is a good question. It spoke, its raspy voice just barely sounding interested. Its gaze then turned to Naruto. This is more than that cave. I wonder if you are finally ready to accept my proposition, to finally merge and gain the power you will need to save them. It said as though in thought, but knew that the blonde was thinking the exact same. There is a price for it, of course. You would gain a considerable amount of bloodlust, and you would have moments of unadulterated insanity. But I think that you know how to control such urges. You would gain even more control of the darkness, and your Rinnegan would get a boost in power as well. It spoke as though it were a choice. But they both knew that it wouldn't be. It is necessary. Naruto thought. You make a good point in the fact that I will need the power. But then this place would feel even more empty. He responded after a few moments. Yami chuckled, its raspy voice sounding even colder than sub-zero temperatures. But this place has been empty, ever since Kurama disappeared. Naruto nodded to the being's words, wondering if the nine-tailed fox was actually absorbed, or if something else had happened. Your words speak truth. I was just hoping to still have someone to converse with in this place, Naruto said, just as coldly as Yami. Yami chuckled, and turned back to looking ahead. Well, you know what they say about one who talks with the voices in one's head. Naruto chuckled as well. Hi, but then again, of what use is sanity? Naruto and Yami smirked. In a world filled with the walking dead, I doubt that there is such a thing as sanity anyways. It has no use, and doesn't even exist. The dark being said in response. But since when have we ever been sane anyways? The answer. Never. Both chuckled hollowly. Then I suppose there is no more need to hold off the inevitable. Come my dark side, let us become one entity at long last. As Naruto spoke, the two thrones moved closer, merging together with the two of them as well. A dark light flashed in the mindscape, and when it was gone, only one person sat on the single throne. The blonde opened his eyes as a single band of hair covered his right one. Just before it settled, one could see a red Rinnegan taking the place of the once purple eye. The left was still purple, and both glowed with an inner power. The newly whole blonde breathed in and out slowly. Let us see if the world is ready for one such as I to walk on it. His voice was low, nearly a whisper, but the chuckle after sounded as cold as a void. I will protect them. And nothing will stop me, not even the gods themselves. After all, the dark holds many things best left unseen. The new Naruto thought to himself. His hand was encased in a darkness that was darker than black, before returning to normal. Naruto then vanished from the mindscape, leaving an object from his left hand. An orb of the darkest substance one would ever see. It vanished shortly after the blonde, disappearing from the mindscape, as though it never existed in the first place. But in its place it left a feeling of cold, and warmth so great, that it would be considered a temperature's paradox. A freezing feeling that was also burning, as though the elements of darkness and light had joined hands. Of fire and ice. Siko awoke hearing the sounds of them groaning the same song she had heard since the outbreak began. She shifted a little, as though to get up, but a whisper stopped her. Don't! They'll hear! She looked to her side, recognizing the face of the man she had fallen for. His goggles hid his eyes, but she noticed a slight glow beneath them. On the left was a dim purple light, and the right was a dark red. The glow wouldn't be noticed, unless if one was close. Though the bang of hair that fell before the right side made it harder to spot. She felt a warm and cool sensation as she gazed at his goggled eyes. It made her feel both danger and safety from his presence. Wait for them to pass, then move quietly to the back of the shrine, he whispered lowly, not even sounding as if he breathed. She nodded, still in the process of rebooting her mind, though she knew it would return momentarily. The two waited for nearly half an hour, as the sounds of the undead slowly died away. She remembered everything from the night before, with surprising clarity. She would probably be able to write it all down, if she had the tools to do so. After the abominations left, the two of them slowly moved behind the statue of the deity worshipped there. Siko made only the smallest of noises, whilst Naruto made none. She felt as though she would be walking through a graveyard with how quiet he was. Naruto whispered to her, as they pressed their backs against the statue. I'm going to warn you now. I heard something else out there. It seemed to move faster than those things. But it didn't seem to act like them. I don't know what it was, or if it's friendly, but I will get us out of here soon. He then made a sushing motion, and held his left hand up, appearing to be reaching for something in front of him, whilst concentrating. She would have asked what he was doing, but remained quiet. Naruto still hadn't mastered the technicalities of the jutsu he was using, so he had to concentrate in order to keep it stable for passengers. He could use it on himself fine, but he wasn't as good as he wished to be. He had to be sure, and also put some wards on Siko to ensure her safety. He didn't know what he heard out there earlier, but he didn't want to put Siko at risk just to satisfy an idle curiosity. Allowing his senses to reach out to a specific point, and controlling his chakra to latch onto it, he turned his left hand counterclockwise while slowly grasping what he sensed. 2.13. Clockwise chakra spin, at a 30 times sound velocity. 10 by 10 radial sphere barrier. Counterclock grasp. Solidify the sphere. Increase chakra density by 40.12. Increase velocity by 2, further solidifying the sphere, then reduce by 8 to stabilize. Asterisk. He thought quickly, though nearly sighed as he remembered why he had to. Stupid ass Uzumaki chakra dense reserves. Why the hell couldn't I have been normal enough to not have to suck at control? He asked mentally, as he finally closed his fist. Siko-chan. When I tell you to grab my left shoulder, he said quietly, though it was nearly drowned out by a different sound. It sounded like the growl of a wild beast, though it also sounded as if in pain. Now! Naruto said loudly, and pulled his fist close to his chest. She clutched onto him as a ragged bark sounded, and felt a sense of vertigo. As a dark yellow flash of light filled her vision, she briefly caught the sight of a skinless dog bounding towards them. She tried to shout, but she couldn't hear even her own voice as she saw bright flashes in front of her. She felt like she was floating in a pool of nothing, though it was brighter than a neon sign. She finally felt air after only a few seconds, and took a deep breath. Though she regretted it as she felt her stomach churning. She opened her eyes, not even realizing they had been closed, to notice a room she had only seen in passing. It was the medical room of Death's Reckoning. She heard Naruto chuckling, and turned to him. He handed her a bucket, which she grabbed at a speed she never even thought she could use, before retching out a small amount of phlegm. Sorry about the ride, it happens the first few times to everybody. Even I did that when I first learned to use the flying Raijin. She groaned, after she finished heaving, and turned to him with a classic what the fuck look. Naruto would have laughed at her, if he knew that she didn't know what he was really talking about. He then decided to explain. The original technique was created by the Naidame Hokage, Senju Tobarama. He would mark kunai, and other objects with a sealing writ, that he could later teleport to by using an advanced reverse summoning. My father, later on, took it on himself to expand the use of space/time ninjutsu. By crossing over Senju and Uzumaki Fuin styles, he created a teleporting writ that didn't require large, or dense chakra reserves. He almost sweat-dropped after saying this. It requires a type of control that most Uzumaki would have trouble with. Let alone me. Naruto then chuckled, and laid his hand on her shoulder. Congratulations. You are the first person native to this world to experience what it's like to travel through a wormhole, and get to live to tell about it. He noticed her look turning to a surprised expression, before she shouted. What the hell was that? They then heard a crash from below them, and Siko almost jumped when she heard somebody running towards them from down the hall. As the door flew inwards, they saw Rika glaring at Naruto, who just waved her off. We're back, he said before turning to the journal he had marked. I thought that Saya had this. He ignored the huff from Rika, and turned back to Siko. So how was the feeling? Moving at speeds that could possibly rival, if not outpace, the velocity of light? It can be pretty daunting, right? Rika then gasped, and looked at the young sword woman. You did what now? Came the voice of Jack, as he and Hanzo walked into the room. Naruto looked to the glazed man, and smirked. I basically ripped open the fabrics of space and time, and pulled her along through the portal that opened up here. The first time is always so memorable. He chuckled, which caused the two men to laugh at the joke. Rika coughed, and tried to hide her small blush. It took Siko just a moment longer to get it, and she turned red in embarrassment. Naruto then turned serious, and spoke in a cold monotone that was laced with authority. Sit rep now. Jack straightened up and spoke. Sir, we have arrived safely at the Takagi Manor. The reckoning is powered down at the moment, with only primary comms open, and power being used by the anti-EMP shields, and the barest of necessities to keep security running internally. We are using the secondary to keep the loading bay powered for maintenance work on the Jeep. He paused for a moment, to take breath. Weapons are currently at full capacity, and the armory is keyed to open only for the primary members of the team. Supplies are at a 98% load, with medical supplies running at max stock. We are currently awaiting Takagi Shichiro's word on the allowed time we can remain here. Jack finished, though Naruto waved off the last bit. Word from the Emperor? Naruto asked. Hanzo shook his head, signifying that there was none. Comms are sporadic, and we can barely pick up a signal. They have tried, but the message was only partly heard. The rest was static. We only know that the US are going to use tactical nukes to destroy the most populated areas of infection, all around the world. Naruto scowled at that and turned to Rika. Get those shields fully powered. Hanzo, send a comm out on frequency BLD02. Those frequencies haven't been used in a number of years, but the palace still has their old receiver. Make sure they know what our location and situation is. Tell them we have a number of survivors and need an evac soon. I'll personally head out to see if there are others in the city. Make sure that we are ready to move out at the drop of a pin. The three saluted by raising their right hands to rest beside their faces, the palm facing their backs, before they moved out into the hallway. Naruto then turned to Siko. You better get some rest. It's only 3 in the morning, and the after-jump effects are more than likely going to hit hard in a few minutes. The barrier I used wasn't the greatest, but it at least kept you in one piece. Siko nodded before she started to feel dizzy and nearly puked again. Rest in here for now, he said as he pulled out a slab from the wall and pushed a few buttons. A bed dropped down behind her, which she immediately moved to. Naruto turned towards the door and sighed. Time to talk with the leader. After I work on reports. Naruto moved within the halls of the Takagi Manor. It was silent, and he'd barely seen anyone aside from the occasional guard or maid bustling about. He continued walking towards Shichiro's office, his steps even more quiet than the silence he walked in. His eyes stayed directly in front of him as he approached the door. He could feel the presence of Shichiro's wife in the room as he approached. He'd met Yuriko a few times before, in passing, and once in person when she had arrived to pick up Saya from school a month before the outbreak. He'd been relaxed enough to notice that she was fairly kind to Saya and her classmates. He never really talked to her though, and didn't even feel any guilt about it. He paused, just outside of the door, stretching his chakra out slightly to feel if anyone else was near. Feeling nothing, he knocked. He felt her nearing the door, but thought for just a moment before it opened. Could that have been a freak occurrence, or will more of those hounds start showing up? He stopped there, not knowing the answer to his question, as the door opened and Yuriko looked into his goggled eyes. Well, this is unexpected. Welcome to my husband's home, Namike-san. She spoke as she finally got a good look at him. I thank you for the gesture, Lady Takagi. But I'm afraid I must speak with Soichiro-san, as soon as possible, he replied. Yuriko nodded and stepped aside to allow the blonde in. She took notice of the silence as he walked past her, heading towards the chair in front of the desk. She thought it odd that he didn't make any sound with his steps, but shrugged it off. I apologize for the fact that Soichiro isn't here at the moment. He is out with a group of guards getting supplies. If it doesn't bother you, would you care for a drink before he gets back? She asked as he sat down with his back resting on the left side of the chair's backrest. Tea will be fine, milady. Arigato. She nodded as she pulled her cell phone out and dialed for a maid. When she put the phone away, she sat down in her husband's desk chair and smiled. I must express my gratitude to you, Namike-san. Without your help, Saya-chan wouldn't have made it here. So I thank you, she said sincerely, and extended her hand to shake his. He nodded as he shook her hand, and relaxed back into the chair. It was no trouble. I would do so again to make sure that all of my friends are safe, he said, not taking his eyes off of hers. She noticed that although his posture seemed relaxed and bored, his muscles were coiled as though to spring into action at the drop of a pin. Her smile lessened a little, though she kept it from showing. Naruto noticed her smile drop a fraction, but paid it no heed. He turned his eyes just slightly to look out the window over her shoulder, and noticed the lights from a group of trucks heading closer to the manor. It won't be long anyways. Soichiro-san seems to have finished his errands, he said, taking small note of how much time had passed since his jump here. It was nearing dusk. Yuriko turned the chair to look out towards where he was looking. Noticing a few small dots on the road, she nearly whistled at how good his eyesight was. Impressive. At least some of the stories about you are true. It was said that you could see in extremely clear detail miles of distance, far beyond a human's capabilities, she said, as the truck got closer to the mansion. I wonder just how many stories about you are true. Naruto didn't respond, not even caring of where that conversation would go. He didn't boast anymore, as he didn't need to anymore. He stood silently, and decided to wait for Soichiro in the courtyard, leaving without a sound, no longer paying attention to Yuriko. Some say that you can even breathe fire, isn't that just silly, Namike-san? Yuriko said as she turned back, noticing his empty seat, and the fact that he vanished. She sighed after a moment. Well, that also proves another. Soichiro walked through the doors, still looking like a hard ass, but he was grieving at the loss of his old friend. He made it seem like he didn't care to most people, but deep down he was angry at himself, as well as them. He didn't shed tears, nor make a sound, as he had to set an example and keep order among those he had rescued, and with those who followed him. He paused for a moment when he caught sight of the only Hayabusa member he didn't know very well. Namike's Naruto. I was wondering when you'd show up, he said with the usual authority held in his voice. Let's cut right to the chase, and skip the small pleasantries, Soichiro-san. I've just received word that the Americans are launching tactical nuclear missiles to each of the most populated cities. They plan to annihilate the infection with radiation, would be my guess. Naruto spoke with a cold tone. Soichiro felt a shiver run up his spine when the young man spoke. He'd only ever heard such a tone from one other man when that person was angry. It was the tone of a warrior that would kill you in a moment should one be against that person. He heard the same tone from the man who had taught him to wield a blade. It was a tone that he had never been able to use like his sensei could, and Naruto's was even more frozen. Naruto's coat appeared to be crimson as he stood just outside of the light in the hallway. It made Soichiro think that the young Hayabusa was in fact a devil. And with the slight glow behind his goggles, the older man felt that it was more true than the fact that the dead walked the earth. He didn't know why, but he felt a darkness within the shinobi. A darkness that could save, or destroy the world. He felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up, and for a moment, he wanted to run from the blonde as if he were the Shinigami. I see. That would include Tokunoso, I assume? He spoke, though it sounded a little more submissive. The blonde nodded, and stepped fully into the light. Chances are, we will either be hit tonight, or in the morning. Either way, it will make defending this place a lot more difficult. Even if it doesn't hit land, the EMP will wipe out all electronics. If the first 2 or 3 don't hit, they'll stage a HNE. Soichiro nodded, though didn't really understand those terms too well. He noticed that Naruto's coat looked more like dried blood than crimson. He shivered again slightly, and decided to head to his office. Arigato for the information, Naruto-san. But I must return to my office soon. You and your crew may stay here for as long as you need. I only ask that you keep protecting my daughter. He spoke before moving past the blonde. He heard the shinobi's reply, even though it sounded more like a whisper. As long as I am around, nothing will harm her. You have my word, Lord Takagi. He turned around to say thank you again, but the blonde had vanished. The devil wears red, but your word is more binding than any promise made by a demon, he said, turning around to see his wife approaching. I'll hold you to that, Naruto-san. Let's just hope that the Emperor was right about you. Naruto approached Koda as the teen was cleaning the guns he used. The blonde noticed the gun enthusiast grinning as his bespectacled gaze glanced over each of the parts. I trust that you like the gear you are using, Koda? The slightly younger teen jumped and spun around. Naruto-san! He shouted, grasping his chest before pointing at the shinobi. Don't do that! Naruto chuckled before raising his left hand that carried a small briefcase. My apologies, Koda. I think you might find these useful. He then gave the gun enthusiast the briefcase. Inside are a few pieces that will make using those easier. Suppressors, tactical lights, and scopes. Be warned that these are illegal models. But I don't think that we have to worry about police forces stopping us because of that. Koda's eyes glinted as he opened the case, and he grinned. You are awesome, Naruto-san. Did anyone ever tell you that? Naruto chuckled again, though it wasn't full of mirth. It was hollow. A few times. Enjoyed the toys. I trust that nobody has given you trouble for carrying those guns, now have they? Koda shook his head. Only once, but Miss Rika put a stop to it. Nearly took a guy's ear off with a .38 she was cleaning. It was an impressive shot, considering she was halfway across the courtyard. Naruto nodded before turning around. She is in the top 5 of marksmen in Japan's special forces. She's only second to me in the team. Be ready, as we may have to leave before dawn. Koda nodded, then remembered something. Oh yeah, Naruto-san. Naruto turned and raised his hand. Please stop with the formality. It makes me sound old. Koda nodded, but pressed on. Anyway, Saya-sen wanted everyone from the school to meet at her room. She wants to talk about something. Naruto nodded and started to walk away again. No doubt it's about her wanting to leave here. I'll be along shortly. Have fun with those. Koda smiled, before turning back to the workbench he was at. I will, and arigato. Naruto walked away, but sighed. I have a feeling that tonight is going to be one hell of a party, he whispered, but slowly smiled at the thought. Saya sighed as she waited for the group to arrive. She thought about the small argument she had with her mother not even halfway through that morning. Why can't they see that I am capable of going on? I don't need their protection. Not with Naruto-kun around. She thought as Rei and Yuki watched her. They all knew that Naruto was back, having seen Siko. They didn't know how he arrived so quickly, but shook it off as unimportant. That man can be just like a ghost. Saya sighed again, still only knowing so much about the blonde enigma that she found herself enamored with. The door opened, and Koda walked in, smiling as though it were his birthday. He was followed by Siko and Kyoko. They waited another 5 minutes before Shizuka arrived. After waiting just a bit longer once the blonde school nurse walked in, Saya sighed again before just deciding to get the small meeting over with. She had hoped that Naruto would show up, but assumed that he was busy since he didn't. We need to decide what we are going to do, she said with a determined hardness shining in her eyes. The others straightened themselves from their slouched positions. What do you mean, Saya-san? Rei asked, narrowing her eyes slightly. What I mean is, we need to decide whether or not we will join this larger, and supposedly safer group, she replied. When she knew all of their attention was on her, she stood up from her leaning against the wall. Will we stay with my father's group, or see if Naruto-kun will take us? If he can't, then we should also see if we can strike out on our own. Kyoko looked towards the door, and bit her lip as a nervous sign. But wouldn't it be safer to stay? She asked after a moment. Saya and Siko sighed at the teacher. Siko knew that it might have been a good idea, if they had a good place that was easy to defend. Saya also knew this. It may seem safe, but what you have failed to see is that should even one of the people be infected, it could tear apart the entire group. Numbers are only safe when you have a spot that can be locked down and defended easily. If one does not have such a place, it is safer to stay moving. The problem is that when you are in a moving group, high numbers will slow it down. That increases the chances of infection spreading. Spoke a voice that everyone knew. Looking around for the blonde Hayabusa member, the group almost jumped when he fell from the roof. Landing as silently as an abandoned graveyard, Naruto spoke again before anyone could shout or say anything as he stood up from the crouch he landed in. One must be wary, even during times of peace. Larger groups make it harder to survive, no matter the situation. It is why we shinobi only operated in groups of 4 to 12, depending on the mission. Some of our missions were so dangerous that we even had to send just one shinobi. These were SS to SSS rank jobs, and most only came back in body bags. Or not at all. He then turned to Shizuka, and slightly sweat dropped as he watched her peel a banana. It is also recommended that a medical practitioner is in such small groups in order to keep the survival rates high. He then turned to Saya. The reckoning is almost ready to head out. Should any of you wish to, you may come. He then turned to leave, but stopped as he opened the door. Be ready and be warned. There will be havoc this night. He spoke coldly, then continued to leave. As the door closed, everyone sighed. Koda then spoke with excitement. That was awesome! I don't know about any of you, but I'm sticking with Naruto. He's got better equipment. He then toned it down a little. But he's right. In such situations, traveling in a large group is far more dangerous than just a small one. Siko and Saya nodded, before turning to the others. Yuki nodded, which made Kyoko think for a moment before agreeing. Rei grabbed the bayonet gun that she had acquired, and Shizuka just nodded. Though the blonde nurse didn't seem to be paying too much attention. Saya then spoke. Then we leave with Naruto-kun. But I wonder what he meant about tonight. Siko turned to the window, and her eyes widened when a bright light nearly blinded everyone. Then a large noise spread across their ears. When it was over, Saya looked towards the light that had gone out. What the hell? Koda asked. Saya looked towards her digital clock and noticed that it was dark as well. A small sizzling noise sounded from her phone, which she picked up. Her eyes widened as she saw that it was smoking slightly, and had lost power. Rei, look through your scope, see if you have the red dot sight in it. Rei nodded, and looked through the scope, but frowned. I don't have one. Saya then cursed. Damn it, that was a HANE. She then turned and ran towards the door, leaving to find Naruto. But stopped at the door when Rika appeared. We're going to have to get ready. Meet at the reckoning in 30 minutes. The sun's about to go down, she said, and then left. Rei then heard a small noise from her gun. Looking back into the scope, she blinked as she noticed the small red dot reappear. My dot's back. Saya turned to look at her, and raised an eyebrow. What? Did he make those small things immune to EMPs? Koda nodded to the rosette, as he moved to go past her. We should go. Soichiro sighed as he saw the flash, and then was covered in darkness due to the lights giving out. Yuriko stood next to him, but made no move when the flash appeared from outside of the window. Many shouts were heard, as the civilians they had rescued started to move in confusion. You were right, Naruto-san. He spoke as the blonde seemed to melt out of the shadows. The blonde responded. Thank the gods that we were able to pick up that small bit of info. Comms are not working as well as they should. Soichiro nodded, and turned to Yuriko. Have the men set up candles, we'll be needing them to get through the night. The lady of the manor nodded, and left. Having so many people with us could be a problem right now. Will you help us, Naruto-san? The blonde nodded, but thought of something else. We have too many here that aren't trained. Most, if not all of them will die. He then turned to leave. Should the worst happen, know that'll get us out of here. We can't afford to lose any of the Hayabusa. His voice sounded cold still, but Soichiro paid little mind. He just nodded as Naruto left. I may have to use more chakra than I have been. My own group doesn't seem to fear it, but I can't be too sure about the others. The blonde thought, as he moved like a phantom. The guards never even knew he passed by them, unless they were looking when he did so. Many felt chills when he passed, and almost all of them were on edge. Sasuke, is everything ready for our departure? Naruto asked, as he reached the Reckoning's command bridge. The bandaged man nodded, having gotten used to when Naruto appeared out of nowhere. Though he would still shiver at the blonde's tone. Hi! The Reckoning is ready. He then paused, turning to his commander. Boss, what'll happen to Takagi's group? Naruto sighed as the gunner asked that. Many of them won't make it. I may be fast, and I'll have Bunshin ready. But even I can't be everywhere at once. He then turned to head up to the nest. I'll do what I can, however. Jack nodded to the blonde, and then asked what he really wanted to know. What about Mira? The blonde stopped for a second. Just in the door. She should be heading towards the base I have set up. I left directions with the MIA Hayabusa Kagero. He then continued, as Jack sighed in relief. The blonde released some of his chakra as he made it up to the nest. It made everyone around the Reckoning stop for a second and look around. They couldn't see the energy as it was small enough to hide, but they could feel the cold and warm feelings it gave. He did so in preparation of what he knew would happen that very night. He then placed his hands into an old, yet trusted hand sign. Kagabanshin, he whispered, as 5 clones appeared next to him. They then vanished in bursts of speed. Let us see if those 5 will be enough. They'll last, but... He then turned as the manor's guards finished setting candles. We have 10 minutes before the sun goes down. Then all of hell will start knocking. His eyes glowed slightly brighter, and he smiled as Rika approached from inside the Reckoning. May we dance to a fine tune this night? He said, just loud enough for her to hear. Why do I not like that smile? Rika asked herself. He then turned to her. We'll have to pull Sachiro-san and his family out. We should also grab as many of his guard as we can if possible. Try and get as many of them, and the civs into his own vehicles. We'll have to replace parts in them, so have Hanzo ready. Rika nodded, and left to carry out her orders. I'd say we have 20 minutes after sundown. Then the dead will knock on the gate. He thought, as he spied multiple dots heading towards the manor. Those guards and civilians are too loud. Untrained. They will panic and cause more of them to come. He then turned as the group of teens that he had brought made their way to the Reckoning. Followed by Shizuka and Kyoko after a few moments. There they are. The boss is kind of a hypocrite, right? Said one of the clones as they stayed hidden on the rooftop of the manor. Quite. Don't you know that he can hear? What do you think he'll do when he finds out you just dissed him? Said another. The other 3 watched. One nearly laughed as the 2 arguing clones started to butt heads. The last clone looked towards where the original Naruto had disappeared to, and sighed. He still has a small hero complex. You all should know that. He'll save as many as he can, even at the cost of his own life. If anything can kill him, that is. The others nodded, and looked back towards the gate. There will be a lot of burning zombies tonight. Can't believe he wants us to torch the place when he gives the signal. The quietest clone spoke. The others nodded, though the first smirked. You all can worry, but I'ma make one big-ass fire. The clone chuckled, with a pyromanic gleam in its eyes. The others sighed, and started to wonder if having slight independence was a good thing. Are you sure we should help him, Mira? Kagero asked, as the 2 spied the Takagi manor from the forest surrounding the area. The doctor sighed, but kept looking at Death's Reckoning, feeling as though there was a familiar presence there. I don't care about him. But something feels familiar about that vehicle, almost like someone I know is there. She then turned to the gunblade wielder. We'll have to make sure that those people get through this. Are your nanobots okay? The man nodded, and allowed a small amount of electricity to pass between his fingers. HUD says they're at 60%, I should be good in 5. Mira nodded, and turned back to the manor, spotting 5 figures on top of the mansion. Kagero, look at the rooftop. Tell me what you see, she said as she fixed her glasses. Kagero looked up a ways, and allowed his eyes to zoom in on the 5 figures. Now that's just cheating, he said, frowning as he spotted 5 Narutos on the roof. What is it? Mira questioned, noticing his frown. He looked towards her and spoke, sounding slightly concerned. He can make copies of himself, that or he has brothers that look just like him. Mira raised an eyebrow, before grabbing a pair of binoculars from her pack. She looked, and then her mouth opened in slight surprise. What the hell? She then gasped as one of the blondes turned to look in their direction. Shit! She said, as the blonde stared right at her for a moment, and then looked back towards the gate. She then grabbed Kagero's hand and stepped backwards into the darkness. He knows we're here. Kagero grunted, and went to grab his weapon. He then decided to wait. Why don't we see just how good he is? Mira hesitated for a second, before nodding. Hi. Let us see just what all he can do, and if those rumors are true. The two then climbed one of the trees to get a better view of the battle. They would help the civilians, but wanted to see just how powerful the blonde Hayabusa member was. Yuriko watched as her daughter got on board Naruto's truck. She had just finished giving the orders to set up candles in the courtyard when she noticed her daughter and friends. She sighed, recalling the argument they had earlier. That must be why she is going with him. I wonder if you can actually keep her safe, young Namikaze. I also don't know why they'd be using that. Our own vehicles are down. She then turned to the gate, and noticed the increasing number of the undead that were heading towards the manor. Her face took a worried expression, as the numbers increased every moment. The guards were working as quietly as possible, but the noise was still too high. She looked back towards the reckoning, and saw Naruto step out of it. She hadn't seen Rika leave it, but noticed the sniper rounding up civilians and taking them towards safer areas. Areas away from the front of the manor. That'll help for a little while. She then noticed Naruto walking towards the gate. He stopped about halfway there, and just stood still, his arms crossed, and watching the mass amount of zombies as they approached. What is he doing? She whispered, as Soichiro approached her. Looks like he's ready. I wonder if what the Emperor said about him is true. He spoke from behind her. Yuriko nodded, and then looked to the reckoning. She saw that Kota had gotten onto the nest, along with Rei and Saya. Naruto waited, his katana sheathed and held in his left hand. His crossed arms tensed slightly, and he glanced towards the guards as they moved back towards the manor. The sun was finally disappearing fully beyond the horizon. The darkness of night was growing, and even though the candles had been lit, it was still dark. That is fine, I've dealt with near-complete darkness before, he thought as he noticed the vast numbers of the undead getting even closer. He sighed, and closed his eyes for a short time, counting the time as the undead finally started to claw at the gate. He opened his eyes, and uncrossed his arms. Just as the guard started to twitch in nervousness, he flicked the blade's tsuba away from the sheath, waiting for the gate to be brought down from the amount of bodies pushing against it. It begins. Come and dance with me, abominations, he whispered, and placed his right hand on the handle of his blade. The gate strained slightly, and his eyes narrowed. It finally gave way, toppling over, with a few zombies falling on it. The nervous guard finally snapped, bringing his rifle to bear and firing before Soichiro could give the order. Damn! Naruto sighed again, as the undead fell into a frenzy and tried to rush forwards. Hundreds of them moving just slightly faster than normal, Naruto then moved at a speed that surprised most of the residents of Takagi Manor, seeming to vanish, and reappearing in front of a zombie, before a flash appeared, slicing through 4 of them, rendering the abominations headless. Soichiro smirked as he saw this, while the others looked on in shock. The Lord Takagi then shouted, "Don't just stand there, fire!" It brought the guards and his wife out of their shock, and they followed his orders. Kota crouched, and brought his rifle to bear. having mounted a scope and added a suppressor to the gun he chose to grab from the armory. It was different than the ones he had grabbed before. Housing a revolver-styled cylinder magazine, using .357 rounds as the primary rounds. He took aim just as Naruto moved, and fired at one of the undead. Not expecting the slightly higher recoil, his eyes widened when the monster's head was blown away. He grinned as he aimed once more, tightening his shoulder. He fired again. The ammo box he had set next to his left leg was open and full. He chuckled as he aimed again, and grinned as those he shot no longer had heads. "Naruto, you have got to be more of a badass than I've heard," he said, reloading the rifle just like one would a revolver that had 8 rounds. Kota's fingers were moving at a decent pace. Saya looked at the gun enthusiast with a raised eyebrow, while Rei kept hers at the ready. They weren't the best with the weapons, but could at least cover him when the zombies got closer. Naruto breathed calmly as another abomination fell to his blade. He sidestepped to the left, his right arm moving at speeds that defied human norms. He cleaved another in half, and spun around it, bringing another slice through another head. His face was calm, and if one could see his eyes, they would think that he was in a trance. Stepping over the corpse, he crouched slightly, and raised his blade in another vertical slash. He then sidestepped right and jumped. Flipping so that he was head first, he brought the blade out while spinning in a counterclockwise rotation, removing the heads of those around him, before completing his flip and landing on the shoulders of another. He kicked as he jumped again, hard enough to remove half of the thing's skull. Blood and gray matter nearly exploded out with the force. He landed again in front of 4, as silent as a ghost. Flipping his blade into a reverse grip, he channeled some chakra, summoning another katana into his left hand held in the same way. He slashed with the left blade, while the right was brought in the opposite direction, creating a similar cut that scissors would. He then flipped the blades into a normal hold, and stepped 2 paces forward, binging his blades down from an overhead slash and slicing one more into thirds. The clones should be ready in 10. 3 will accumulate nature chakra to empower the 5th, who will blast out a katon, Guka Mekyaku, and 4th a Daitapa. That's why I had everyone stay back, he thought, as he removed a group of 8 zombies from the world. He decided to slow down a little, to let the others rack up a few kills. He raised his right blade and slashed horizontally, taking another group of 4 out. He leapt over the fallen corpses, and brought his left blade down through another vertically, cleaving it in half, and then stepping right to take another. To most his cuts looked like flashes of light, but to him the flashes were slow, barely even moving to his eyes. He was almost hyper-focusing on the creatures he was slaying, which in turn made everything crawl to a near standstill. He wondered briefly if this was all there was. I could easily wipe out all of the creatures, if this is all they can do, he thought, rushing forward just as fast as when he started. He stopped after passing by at least 20, his blades gleaming in the light of all of the candles. He then flourished his katanas, cleaning them of blood. Once the last drops hit the ground, all 20 fell in 4 to 10 paces. He then sighed, and looked towards the other survivors, frowning as he noticed how many had gotten past him in his ponderings. "Pay attention, Naruto. These things can be almost as dangerous as shinobi," he chastised himself, but then heard a familiar gunshot from a ways away. Looking towards the sound, he saw 2 people he didn't expect to be there, defending the area that led to Takagi's trucks, that also held civilians. "Didn't I tell those 2 to get the hell out of Tokunosu?" he sighed, as Kagero shot another zombie that was getting too close. Naruto's left blade then slashed through another, as his arm reacted instinctively to the thing trying to shuffle past him. "Well, as long as they help," he said before turning to find even more of the undead coming through the gate. "He is pretty fast, isn't he?" Kagero asked, as Mira pulled out a silenced .9mm. Mira said nothing as she fired thrice, hitting 2 of the zombies while the last shot only grazed 1. She frowned slightly, but nodded to the man's question, noticing the flashes of light pick up speed in Naruto's direction. Kagero then moved forward and beheaded the one she missed. "Relax, Mira. Otherwise you won't hit anything," he said, reloading, and then firing at another zombie. He then turned as a bullet flew by his head, hitting another of the undead. He glanced back at the teen who had made the shot, and almost whistled at Kota's rifle skills. "That kid's a good shot," he said as two more were taken out by the gun enthusiast. He then swiped his blade across the neck of another that was getting too close to Mira. Mira and Kagero then looked back towards the gate, and the doctor frowned as she noticed too many of the undead coming from other directions. "This is bad, I don't think anyone will." She stopped as she saw Naruto spit a human-sized fireball into a small group of zombies, and then appeared behind another two. She also noticed quite a few of Takagi's guards running in to fight. Her eyebrow twitched when Naruto's hand was engulfed in electricity that everyone could hear. "He's not even human, is he, Doc?" Kagero asked as the blonde appeared inside another group, and discharged the built-up lightning. The scything energy tore the zombies apart, and Kagero could have sworn that he saw a red glow from under the right lens of Naruto's goggles. He would have Mira check the recording later. Mira nodded, and turned to see the amethyst-haired member of the blonde's group leave the reckoning. Siko grinned slightly as she walked out of the reckoning, her blade casting a small amount of mist from the edge as she pulled it from the scabbard. Her eyes softening as she saw Naruto's area getting fewer numbers of the undead. She may have been better since meeting him, but she still liked seeing the amount of corpses he left. Rubbing her legs together slightly, she swung her blade to the right as a zombie approached her from just slightly behind. She then looked towards the front of the manor, and noticed how many guards were left there. She frowned slightly. "Undisciplined," she whispered as one fell after running into a group. She then spun and beheaded another of the abominations, watching in fascination as the blood froze before it could hit the ground. She started to feel a heat that contradicted the chill from her blade. Her blue eyes glazed slightly as she turned to see a few more zombies shuffling towards the form of Kagero as his gunblade made the most noise nearby. She couldn't exactly place where she had seen him before, but for a moment she felt as though he shouldn't be anywhere near Death's Reckoning. She then stabbed behind her and looked over her right shoulder, grinning as the zombie she ran through slowly seemed to get frost on its flesh. She almost laughed when she took the blade out, and it shattered as it fell. She looked to the blade she held and smiled when she noticed it was clean. "You really are special. Just like Naruto-kun," she said, her voice soft. She then grinned, as she decided to join the fight. Letting her inner demon out to play for a while, she had decided, wouldn't be too bad for now. Naruto stopped for a moment as he caught the memories of a sixth clone he had sent out to seal most of the civilians away for easy transport, frowning as he had only caught a third of them since many tried to run. Damn. That's where a lot of them are coming from. He then turned to the last few that were trying to go through the gate. "Fuck it," he said as he sheathed his blade, and crouched. Channeling chakra into the katana, he drew it while blitzing forward at a pace no normal human could see. He reappeared a second later in the same spot, sheathing his sword again. The group of 8 zombies then fell in pieces. He then turned to release another fireball, and watched as it incinerated 3 more. He then turned to see most of the guards trying, and failing to overcome the vast amount of enemies that were moving towards them. He sighed, and made a hand seal while looking to the 5 clones on the roof. One nodded, and barked out at the other 4. 3 of them sat down to start gathering some nature energy, while the other 2 started channeling chakra. The real Naruto then looked towards the battlefield and saw Soichiro and Yuriko making a stand. "Hanzo," he spoke into his small radio. "Get everyone on board. I'm torching the place." He then rushed to grab the 2 Takagi members. The 2 didn't know what had grabbed them as he appeared, and jumped onto the top of Death's Reckoning. "Siko, get in!" he shouted as the purple-haired swordswoman sliced through another zombie. She turned and ran back to the mobile barracks. He then gathered chakra into his throat, and released it out towards the front of the reckoning. Flames and lightning flew out from his mouth, and disintegrated the undead in the way. "Get us out of here, Hanzo," he spoke into his radio, as Siko got in through the main entrance at the back with Rika right behind her. He sighed in slight relief as Death's Reckoning lurched forward after starting up. Everyone turned as the mobile barracks rushed out of the front gate, watching as a massive wave of flames took over the courtyard. "Katan, Gukamekiaku! Futan de Tapa!" 2 voices shouted just before the wave started. The two voices were the exact same, but others could tell it was two people saying those. Naruto then turned to the left. "You two may as well get up here," he said before Kagero leapt up from the back of the reckoning. Mira was wide-eyed, while Kagero looked like he had swallowed something foul. "Welcome aboard Death's Reckoning. Please enjoy your stay." The blonde spoke in a monotone, before he opened the hatch to head inside. None of the others noticed him pause for a moment, and clenched his fist. When the 5 clones caught their creator's signal, one sighed before giving the orders, mixing the majestic flame destroyer and the great breakthrough. "This'll blow up in our faces." The clone then turned to the one that would use the Mekyaku. "Yep. We're doomed." He sighed after noticing that clone's gaze. "Fuck!" The one that would cast the futon said, before both started channeling chakra. 2 minutes later, the 3 gathering energy dispersed and overpowered the 2 casters. As they shouted out their techniques, the wind-using clone had one last thought as everything was consumed by the flames. "I guess Yami was right. We are insane, and the boss probably controls the urges through us. Damn it." Naruto frowned as Death's Reckoning drove through the streets. There was even more undead than he had at first thought that were walking around. He could tell that Jack was nervous, now that Mira and Kagero were aboard. The man wouldn't be able to take his station at 100%, so the blonde went straight to the armory. He grimaced a little from the energy the clones absorbed. This world still isn't in good health. Better not absorb nature's chakra directly, he thought, almost feeling sick from it. Grabbing an assault rifle and heading back to the nest, the blonde grumbled before making a clone to write a report. He sensed where the others were, and sighed at how tense Saya was. He also made another clone to carry the scroll he had grabbed before departing into the medical room. "At least I was able to get them out. Why do I get the feeling this going to be a long few days?" He then spoke into his shortwave radio. "Hanzo, head for the nearest mall. We may have survivors there, and in a few other areas." He then reached a ladder, heading up to the nest. Checking the firearm he had grabbed, he sighed. "I really don't like this one, but it's the best I've got. Should have loaded an actual turret last week." He sighed at his lack of forethought, and went up. He frowned as he saw Kagero still up there, holding another assault rifle. "Where the fuck?" "Never mind." The nano-user turned to the blonde, and frowned as well. "Let us see if you're as good as they say. I will not attack for now, but I will not stand by when the doctor is in danger." The blonde nodded, before turning to the front of the reckoning and raising the rifle up. He could already see a lot of the undead just a ways away. "Damn it!" he sighed, waiting for when they got closer. "This'll be a long drive," he whispered as Death's Reckoning slowed down, due to the amount of vehicles littering this street. Shrugging, he finally fired 2 rounds to hit one of the approaching zombies. While Kagero also started to fire, he never noticed Naruto's pale features as the blonde ground his teeth in slight pain. Soichiro sighed as his daughter ignored him and Yuriko. The two frowned as Saya left, heading towards Naruto's office with Rei. "You just had to piss her off, didn't you, Yuriko?" he said while looking towards his wife. She scoffed at him, looking away. "And you didn't?" she replied, seemingly angry. He knew she really wasn't, but did grimace. "Fair enough." He then decided to go talk with his daughter, though knew that it might drive them further apart. Yuriko frowned, but followed him. Both were hoping to at least keep a small connection with Saya alive. Neither noticed Siko behind them, watching and nearly laughing at the drama that was going to unfold. She decided to follow them, but stopped for a moment. Maybe I should help Saya. Naruto-kun wouldn't want her to feel bad. She then followed the two, hearing Saya start an argument with Soichiro. "You're an idiot," Jack said as he and Hanzo watched the amount of zombies increase in body count. "Why did you take this road? Granted that it'll be quicker to get there, but really?" He was slightly worried about his boss, knowing what happened the last time he knew the blonde used Sage Mode. "This'll just make it worse," Hanzo huffed, as he turned the wheel, heading around another abandoned car in the middle of the road. "What's the worst that could happen? The reckoning will be fine." He didn't notice the gunner grimacing. "It's not the damn truck I'm worried about," he grumbled, before seeing a fireball shoot from the nest area. It exploded when it hit a group of the undead, taking out the surrounding ones in a 40-foot radius. Well, expect a lot more of those, and expect bigger too. The boss will have to get that energy out, and should he lose control, Tokunosu will be nothing but a hole in the ground. He then turned around to head inside, and found Mira standing in the doorway, looking at him in confusion. Shit. He grimaced again. This wasn't supposed to happen. He almost sighed as Mira narrowed her eyes and spoke. You are familiar, but I can't recall from where, she said before moving around him to see the road they were traveling on. She almost jumped when another fireball exploded to the left of the view screen. Just what the hell is he? She whispered, though just loud enough for Rika to hear. The sniper giggled slightly, before answering the bespectacled woman. He is many things, but the most apt thing to call him is a shinobi. She then looked back out the window, focusing on the mall they were getting closer to. We'll have to stop in a safer area to let everyone rest, Hanzo, she said to the driver, who nodded and decided to take another road. As Death's Reckoning turned to the right, heading down another road, Naruto stopped firing for a moment. He turned his gaze towards the mall, and shifted his head. Kagero would have wondered what the young blonde was thinking, but then stopped. He also turned to gaze at the mall. Both men stood there for a moment, both of them narrowing their eyes. Kagero's eyes then widened when they heard a whisper that wasn't actually in the air. It reached into their minds. Help us, Kami-sama. Please. Naruto sighed before firing another blast of wind, and then reloading his gun. Seems we have a sleeping psychic in there. Kagero turned to the blonde. What do you mean by sleeping? Naruto clenched his fist again, but felt the natural energy leaving at a slightly faster rate now. He then turned to look directly into Kagero's eyes, making the white-haired man almost gasp at the glow from his goggles. A sleeping psychic is someone who has obvious psychic powers, but cannot fully call on them. Their power lies in a dormant state, and only activates when they are subconsciously trying to call someone, or actually gets trained to unlock said power. Most times, they will only be able to use it for a little while when they are desperate, as the power will quickly seem to leave them afterwards. The blonde then turned back to the mall, knowing it wouldn't be until morning when they got there. Though it never really leaves. We better head back in. Reckoning will be parked for a rest soon. We'll need our strength. Naruto then turned to head back inside. Naruto stood within his mindscape, staring at the gates that once held Kurama. His face was locked in a cold look, and his eyes stared intensely into the darkness. What do my eyes see before me? He asked in a cold tone. I thought that there was nothing left in here. He looked at the small object before him. It appeared to be a mirror, laying on a small altar. The mirror was made of a silver-like metal, and the handle was etched with gold depictions of foxes. The glass looked more like liquid mercury instead of glass. He stared at it for a moment longer, before turning his gaze to the Shinigami. If you come here at the behest of Kami-sama, then speak quickly. I have not the time, nor the patience to deal with you more than is required. The god of death nodded, before taking a scroll from his robes, throwing it to the blonde, before leaving. Naruto sighed before unrolling the scroll. Fuck. He then placed the scroll beside the mirror, and turned to leave. I swear. They seem to enjoy my misfortune. His words echoed throughout the sewer-like mindscape as he disappeared. As he left, he could swear that he heard a deep chuckle. But it was so low that he couldn't even tell where it came from. So he shrugged it off, as he awoke in his office. You are still an idiot, Naruto. A deep voice spoke in the darkness. The mirror flashed afterwards, before silence once again fell in the mindscape. Limbo. Now that is something I won't like using much, Naruto whispered as Rika placed a folder on his desk. The sniper grimaced slightly as the blonde glanced at the folder. We're still heading towards the mall, boss, she spoke as Naruto opened the folder. Inside were orders that he had put in place a few weeks ago. Has this gone through? He asked. Rika nodded, and then turned as a knock sounded on the door. Naruto turned as he sensed Soichiro on the other side, along with the others. Enter. His voice sounded out, but Rika noticed it was more tired than usual. His shoulders were more tense than she had ever seen before. As the door opened, Soichiro, Rei, Saya, Siko, and Kota stepped in. Yuki and Kyoko were behind them, but stayed in the hallway. Soichiro noticed the folder on the desk, but didn't ask about it. He knew about those orders, but he didn't have the clearance to say much about them. "Naruto-kun, we've come to hear about Project 1," Saya said, as she noticed the blonde's eyes glow a little darker. Everyone else felt it first. A chill settled over the group, as Naruto leaned back, his face falling into shadow as Saya felt the chill. "I can only give a few details, as the project itself is classified to Tier 1. Not even the UN could pull the info from Jack or I." Naruto sighed for a moment, before continuing. "The fact is that Project 1 may have started this pandemic. But not even I can say that for sure." Soichiro nodded to his fellow Hayabusa, though the blonde was higher ranked than most of the group. "We had received orders from the Emperor back in November. He wanted to find a lost relic from before the death of Christ. He had been poring over old tomes and consulting with other world leaders to find one. After having found mentions of one artifact, he called us in." The blonde paused, and his gaze went up. "A small team was sent with a full team of scientists. That was at the end of November. On December 13th, we received a radio transmission that was the Hayabusa members. They had called for backup. When the Emperor heard the transmission, he called me personally." Naruto remembered the conversation from back then, almost as if it had happened just a day ago. "By the time my team and I arrived, only one of the four was left. The scientists and the others were already lost. The member only lived long enough to give a briefing about what was in those caves." Saya frowned, before asking what everyone thought. "What was down there, Naruto-kun?" The blonde sighed, before grabbing a bottle of sake from his desk drawer. "The locals called it the Hive. And what I found down there was death. It had always been thought to be a sacred place, rumored to contain defenses against the gates of hell. If it had been sacred, then the Christian god must have either forgot about it, or nothing could maintain it." Opening the bottle, Naruto took a drink, before grabbing a cigarette, lighting it with fire nature chakra, and taking a drag. He then continued. "Using senjutsu to get a feel of the place, I ordered my team to keep their weapons ready. There were 4 of us. Jack, and I, and 2 others. Those 2 were brought back in body bags." Taking a drag, and letting the nicotine flow through him for a moment, Naruto sighed as he let the smoke leave his lungs. "Jack came back changed. At first he seemed angry. Though if it was at the situation, or himself, I cannot say." Soichiro frowned for a moment, as the others looked down and thought. "The locals, as I said, called it the Hive. But the local priest of the chapel called it the Black Eden. Honestly, I just called it a fragment of hell." Naruto's gaze then looked up towards the light of the office. Flashback. December 15th, 2014, 88:40 p.m. "Sir?" One of the 2 other members spoke as they entered the cave. It was dark enough that even night vision goggles would have a bit of trouble seeing everything, but Naruto could see just fine. "Do we have the location of the other teams?" the man asked. Naruto looked further in and frowned. "Already found one of them," he said, and moved forwards, towards an opening that led further in. As they approached, Sasuke gasped as he saw the 4 science members. They had been torn to shreds, and the only thing that let them know who the members were their tags. "What the fuck?" the female member gasped as Naruto knelt to examine a piece of flesh. "These wounds, they are not caused by an animal," Naruto spoke after a few minutes. "Gunner, set up a turret if anyone else comes through here. Eliminate." Sasuke nodded, and took a briefcase from his belt, opening and setting up an automated turret. "Sniper, keep this place secure." The other male member saluted and brought out a lantern. "I will stand guard, sir," he responded. "Sasuke and Hikari, you 2 will follow me. We search for the other team, and kill whatever else moves." The 2 nodded, and after Sasuke finished setting the turret, they followed Naruto as he stepped into the dark corridors of the cave. He paused for only a moment as all of them felt a cold breeze blow from the depths of it. Naruto sighed, as he remembered what had happened just a few minutes after they had entered those corridors. A few minutes later, we heard a scream from him. Yoshi was a good soldier, and one of the best snipers I ever knew besides Rika here. We tried radioing him for a few, but when no word came back, Hikari decided to go see what was wrong. Naruto took another drag of his cigarette. It wasn't until later that we realized we were the only ones left, he said after releasing the nicotine. Given the choice, I would have gladly died instead of bringing those two back in body bags. But alas, that choice was taken from me. Naruto sighed as he said that, then inhaled some more nicotine. After releasing, he turned his gaze back to his audience. I can't go into details, but I will say this. That cave system was the closest thing to hell I have ever been to. Not even the Fourth War was that bad. He turned to Soichiro, and locked gazes with him. Details of the war I speak of would make even you flinch, Lord Takagi. It brought an entire world to its knees. Mayhap the Emperor will allow you to read my bio one day. Naruto then turned his gaze to Saya. Saya-chan, we need to figure out a good time for training everyone. Once we can leave the city and get to the Emperor for orders, I will be able to have the time for a full course. He then took one last drag, before putting the cigarette out in the ashtray on his desk. For now, once we ascertain how many people are at the mall, I can give you all a crash course on the things I will teach you. He then stood up and walked around the desk. This goes for all of you. Consider this the only order I will give right now. Learn, get stronger, and survive. Finish resting, we move out at dawn. He then left the office. Saya nodded and turned to the others. Even Kota seemed nervous, though if it was at the story or something else, she didn't know. She then turned to her father and noticed his confused expression. Training? He asked. Saya nodded and turned to the others. Naruto agreed to teach us how to use chakra, though he never said how other people could have it. Soichiro sighed at her answer. All right. I can see that you would do anything he asks. And it will make you stronger, so I'll agree with this. But do be careful, Saya. Living the way he does can be dangerous. Saya nodded once again before the man left the room. Naruto-kun said that chakra is created from physical and mental energies. The only question I have now is, how can we have something that only appeared in his world? Saya asked herself, as the others just shrugged their shoulders. Naruto sighed as he worked on upgrading his Colt Anaconda. Why the hell would they give me Limbo's secrets? I've read about how Madara used those during the war. It's an overpowered shadow clone. So why? He grumbled, after he bent the barrel. Fuck! He then put the gun, and its parts, into the drawer of the armory's workbench. Not like it matters. I overused the Kagebunshin so much that I'll most likely never even think about using Limbo. He then stood up and checked his watch. 23:17. Really, I need to find something to pass the time. He sighed again, having only been in the armory for 40 minutes. He then grabbed a cigarette and went to the nest to keep watch. As Naruto stood on top of Death's Reckoning, gazing at the moon, he heard a moan from the surrounding zombies. That's getting old. He then turned his gaze to the area it came from, and sweat dropped. He saw two of the abominations fighting over what looked like the corpse of a dog. Okay. He then decided to just watch, along with Jack, who had stepped up for a cigar. "Wanna place a bet to see which one wins?" Jack asked in a whisper. Naruto nodded, and set 40 ryo down on the small table he had brought up. 40 on the fat ass, he said. The gunner nodded, and matched the amount. I'll go with the other then. They watched for at least a half hour, before the one Naruto picked ripped off the other zombie's arm and hit the skinny thing with it. Naruto almost laughed as the zombie's neck was broken when it hit the ground. Fatso seems stronger than the others, he quietly said, as Jack paid up. Probably 'cause it weighs a whole fucking lot, Jack replied, as Naruto grabbed another smoke. Naruto nodded, and turned his gaze back to the moon. We'll be heading out in a few hours. Be prepped for combat, gunner, the blonde ordered. Jack nodded and left the nest, wondering how Naruto could stay up for days on end and not be tired. He's not even human now, is he? Jack thought. Siko sighed as she approached the medical room. She needed some time alone. She felt her darker side fighting to get out and play. She actually hated it, the fact that she had a dark side in her. She knew that everyone had one, but she hated hers. She opened the door and felt relief that no one was there. She closed the door behind her and moved to sit at the desk that would normally be for the medical member of Naruto's group. She pulled the blade that Naruto had given her out of its sheath and set it on the desk. She gazed at it, noticing how a cold mist seemed to seep from the edge of the blade. "I know that you don't use chakra, so how can you freeze things?" she asked the blade, though nearly scoffed at asking an inanimate object such a question. She knew that swords couldn't speak. She then gazed towards the bookshelf, noticing another journal that caught her eye. She grew a confused expression, as she didn't think it was there before. Then again, I never really paid much attention to this room. The book was a faded brown, and had the same symbol on it that the sheath of her blade held. Hesitating for only a moment, she then stood and went to grab it. As she picked it up, she looked to the symbol, and noticed it was an emblem of sorts. It was like a shattered mirror, now that she looked at it more closely. A figure was in the picture of the mirror, and a name was engraved in gold just below it. Shiva. Who would have such a name? She then opened the book. The name of the one who wrote it was there. Yuna the First? She gasped at recognizing the name. It was the same as one of Naruto's dead lovers. The fact that it said the first meant that Naruto's lover was a different one. She turned the page to see what this woman had written. The name of this katana was once Shiva's Fang. Forged by, and named after the mythical goddess of diamond dust. The blade is just as cold as Shiva's touch. It was rumored that her very breath could freeze the sun. Her power was enough to freeze the world over in just a few seconds. No one knows what happened to these old gods, such as Ifrit, Rama, Shiva, and many others. It is believed that they were killed by Otsutsuki Kagaya, the 10-tailed rabbit, when she ended the war-torn era. Humans were unable to use magic of any kind back then. Not many know that it was from her son Hagoromo that humans gained the power of chakra, though many would say he was the first to unlock it and taught others to do so. Those words are not true. It is said that this blade houses a part of Shiva's soul, which would be the reason for its power. The blade can only communicate with those it has chosen to wield it. Unfortunately, I was not chosen, and no one else in the past 400 years has been chosen either. Siko closed the book and turned back to the blade. Forged by a goddess? Housing a soul? She questioned, and then looked up. Could that really be why? She then looked back to the blade as it started to glow slightly with an icy blue light. She approached it as the glow got stronger. She then picked it up, and her eyes glazed over, making it seem that no one was there, and her eyes then held a slight glow to their blue depths, though not many would notice it. Naruto stopped for a moment, before putting his cigarette out. There were now 4 in the ashtray, along with Jack's cigar. So you were able to connect with Shiva. This will be interesting. The last time I talked with any of the old gods I almost died laughing. He grinned as he decided to go and wait for Siko to return to the mortal world. He also thought about giving the others weapons that would enable them to start learning how to use chakra. Hagoromo had done the same thing these weapons would do with their chosen wielders, granting them the use of chakra by giving a small jump start to the 8 gates. This would allow for the docile core to be brought back to life, and thus enabling the use of chakra. This was something that was used early on for clans, as most of them were expected to be shinobi. Even samurai clans did this. Hagoromo had taken the knowledge to be used for future generations. The old ones allowed this to happen, and even blessed the man who sealed their destroyer. As Naruto thought on all of this, he stopped to stare at his office door. Shrugging, he entered his office to collect the scroll that held the items. The scroll actually held weapons and armor given by the old gods to help protect the human race of his world. He would often wonder why he sensed deadened chakra coils in the world. He often at times would wonder if he was actually transported through time to the future, but knew that wasn't the case. His first meeting with Kami assured him that it wasn't time travel. Naruto grabbed the scroll from under his desk and left the room, heading back towards Siko. Naruto stepped into the bedroom and gazed as he saw Siko sitting in a chair, with the blade resting in her hands. Naruto paused for a moment, and then spoke to the inhabitant. Are you getting along with Siko-chan, Shiva-sama? The girl smirked before speaking, and her voice had a slightly higher octave than Siko. Hi Naruto-dano. And did all of us not tell you to drop that honorific with us, champion of Kami-sama? Naruto chuckled, before sitting next to the girl. You all may have, but I honestly just like to tease you all. Not even Alexander can break me out of it, and that entity is almost as hard-headed as me when it comes to the things he is serious about. He stopped after that before turning to her. You are more than likely here to tell me something about this situation we are currently in. He paused after her nod. Damn. Well, I just hope that it's not Dash. It is Shido's father, the council member. Though we believe he is under orders, she said, interrupting him. He paused again, before sighing. Balls to the walls, I just had to be right. I hate it when I'm right about this shit. He looked back to her since his eyes traveled to look at the ceiling when he spoke. Next time you see Kami-sama, please tell her I am sorry for whatever it is that I did to make her throw all of this shit at me. I will be most grateful if you do this, Shiva. The possessed girl's sweat dropped. Naruto, she didn't throw this at you. We only just learned this small fact moments before Siko and I met. The blonde sighed again, and almost sobbed at the fact that he couldn't smoke in this room. So he grabbed a scroll and pulled some beer from it. I get the feeling that this will be a shitstorm. Now if Ray Asterisk shows up I'll be pissed. He paused, seeing her glance at him with a blush before casting her gaze to the sword. He sighed again. Fuck me, and my idiotic tendency to state things that suddenly swing my way before they even show up. Too dumb as a fucking rock idiots caused this shit, and now I have to deal with it. Naruto then opened the beer, and chugged it all in just a few seconds. I am now going to sit here and internally cry at my luck. It has been like this ever since I became a genin. My luck is always godly when I gamble, but when it comes to missions and serious shit my luck says fuck you, I'm out of here. And then it just leaves. He pulled another beer out. Shiva's sweat dropped again, and would have giggled if it wasn't for Siko actually finishing her trial. I apologize, Naruto, but Siko has finished her trial. So I must return to our haven. Naruto nodded, and almost sighed. That's fine, Shiva. And please tell Alexander that he still owes me for helping him put a controlled behemoth in Alexandria back into the vault. I swear the shit we all put up with . He then noticed her nod before leaving the girl's body. Naruto noticed that Siko's eyes returned to being her own, but they held a bit more ice in them. He noticed that the darkness he normally felt from her had disappeared, as if it had been frozen before being rejected to the point of no longer existing. Did you have fun, Siko-chan? He spoke before he was grabbed and pulled into a makeout session. He almost wanted to strip her then and there, but held back, allowing her to take control of where this would go. As the kiss finished, she gasped for air, before saying what she wanted. I want you, Naruto-kun. He gazed into her eyes, noticing the determination she held. He sighed before grabbing her hands. I promise you that when we get out of the city, I will give you this. But right now we can't. We need to get out of the city first. Siko hesitated, then nodded. I will hold you to that, Naruto-kun. She then kissed him again, before leaving the room. The boss is meditating, Jack said as Rika went to enter Naruto's office. She stopped, and turned to the gauzed man. Really? At his nod she sighed. Well damn, I was hoping to speak to him. She then turned as she noticed Hanzo walk out of the med room that was at the end of the hall. Headache again? Jack asked the driver. Yep. It's been a bitch lately, the driver responded. I'll be glad to get back to the palace. My betrothed knows how to get rid of it, for a while anyways. The two nodded to him, though he stopped to say one last thing before leaving. Boss wants to move out before dawn. We hope to get to this mall by 10:00. Be sure to get him out of meditation by the time I start up reckoning. Rika nodded, as the driver left, then checked her watch. Jack moved away from the hall as well. You might want to check on him here in a little. His meditations get harder every day. He says it's because of how much damage nature has taken from all of the industrial times that humans have been going through. The world is polluted. Rika frowned at those words, but knew that Naruto was having a hard time with Sage Mode. And they all said global warming was bullshit. Granted, it could be, but for someone like Naruto-kun, it leaves him weakened, she whispered. She then turned to stare at the door. Rei, Saya, Kyoko, and Yuki frowned as Siko told them about Naruto's promise to her. I know that he doesn't like breaking promises, but will he keep it? And can we ask him to promise the same to us? Saya asked, before Yuki spoke up. Of course he will, and we can get him to promise the same to us. Naruto will never break a promise, you all know that. Rei nodded, knowing that Naruto has only ever broken one promise before. It still tore him up, since the one he made it to was dead. He hates breaking promises. He also hates people that lie to themselves. She spoke as Alice looked at them with Shizuka, who was wondering what they were talking about. Are you talking about Nissan? The young girl asked. Siko nodded to her, and knelt down to ruffle her hair. Hi! Naruto-kun doesn't like to break any promise he makes. Just like he promised to protect you, nothing will stop him from keeping it. He will protect you until you tell him to stop. Alice smiled at those words, before turning back to her textbook on computers. Siko looked at it, before asking the girl something that all of the others were wondering. Alice-chan, what grade are you in? Alice looked up to see everyone looking at her. She almost sweat dropped before answering. I'll be in second-year college class by next week. Or I was supposed to be. She sighed after that, knowing that it wouldn't matter anymore. Saya and Rei gasped, while Siko sweat a little. Yuki whistled, while Kyoko gasped. Saya, what level were your textbooks at? Rei whispered to the rosette. Saya sweat, before turning to whisper back. Fourth-year college, but I've only read through the second. Rei's jaw dropped slightly, while Kyoko finally said something. Damn! You are one smart child, Alice-chan. Shizuka giggled at everyone as they were still staring at the girl. I've already got her reading texts from the third year, she said. The others then sweat dropped before Saya asked. And where the hell did you get those, Shizuka-sensei? Shizuka looked at the rosette, smiled, and then answered. Naruto-kun has an entire library from all over the world. I asked him to get all of the textbooks for classes out just before this fiasco with the undead started. She then giggled before turning back to reading a book on medical herbs. The others' sweat dropped, noticing that it was in German. Shizuka-sensei, you can read German? Siko asked. Shizuka nodded. Hi. I can speak, read, and write in German. It was one of the places I went to for classes on being a nurse, with a minor in being a doctor. Siko then nodded, thinking about getting the document folder on Project 1, but decided against it. She wasn't too curious about the project. If Naruto said it was closest to hell, then she believed him. Naruto opened his eyes just before Rika opened the door to his office. Damn it! Sage Mode isn't strong enough in this world. Far too polluted to be of much use, he thought as Rika stepped in. Seeing him grab a beer, and hearing his sigh, she decided to ask how he was doing. You alright, Naruto-kun? He opened the bottle, before grabbing another. I'll be fine. Just frustrated that nature is in such poor condition here. He gave her the bottle, then grabbed a cigarette. If anything happens here, like when Madara was resurrected, then I won't be as strong as I'd like. Rika frowned before opening the bottle she had been given. I felt Shiva earlier. Did she say anything about this? Rika asked, laying a hand on her sidearm. Naruto stayed quiet for a moment. I guess you would feel her presence here, wouldn't you, Wilder of Arc's Cannon? He asked rhetorically. He sighed again, before answering her question. Counselor Shido and Rei are apparently behind the spread of this pandemic. But the Ians think they are under orders. Naruto took a long drag of his cigarette, and a drink from his beer, before continuing. I'll have to capture and interrogate them for more info. Rika sighed, knowing just how much trouble it would be to find the counselor. Let alone the elusive Rei. One was right, wasn't he, boss? She asked, to which he nodded. That man's brother is so far off the grid, that even the gods will have trouble finding him. Naruto spoke after sighing again. They sat there for a few minutes, before Rika decided to ask him about the weapons he carried. Are you trying to find more wilders, Naruto-kun? Naruto smirked for a moment, before replying. Hi. It will make it easier to protect the world. Right now there are only 3. Yourself, Siko, and Jack. As you know, my weapon is only comfortable in my hands. So I doubt that I'll be able to fully join the others in Haven, for a long time. He then looked towards his clock. We'll be moving out in a little while. So be ready. The break had ended, far faster than they all thought time could pass. Though Naruto, Kagero, Soichiro, and even Jack knew that time could make you think it was moving at any speed due to many reasons. Many of the group could not catch it, but Naruto was in a slight amount of pain. This infestation. It's getting worse. Hatred is flying on wings of death. Sage mode is no longer an option. Nature is too polluted. Naruto sighed as he stepped out of the office. EDN will be needed. Sooner than I had thought, at this rate. He whispered as Rika stepped close to him. She followed the blonde as he made his way to the nest. Rika, the mall is nearly a no-go right now. I was only able to pick up one healthy life force through my meditation. Tell Hanzo to floor it. We need to save this one. His orders were acknowledged, and she ran off to the bridge. He then turned to the barracks room, and spotted one of the few he wished to speak with. Ray-chan. Gather Siko, Saya, Yuki, and Kyoko. I'll need all 5 of you to join me on the nest. The girl nodded, and walked into the barracks. Naruto then continued to the ladder to head up there, but spoke out again. Kagero-san. Our history is heavy right now, but we need to work together to get through this. Are you able to help during this time? He asked as he began to climb the ladder. He only paused to hear the man for a moment. Hi. Came the reply, though it sounded reluctant. Naruto then continued, not even noticing the man grumble after he had left. Naruto stopped on the nest, and sighed as he spotted the mall getting closer. He noticed that quite a few windows on the ground floor were broken, and many of them were crowding around those areas. The sounds of gunshots were few, and far between. He had noticed that the reason was more than likely a low amount of ammo. We'll need to gear her up. That pea shooter won't help her much, he said, as the mall came closer, and the 5 he had asked to join him arrived. Koda followed them. Be ready. I'll need you all to guard Reckoning, while I rescue the one survivor here. No one else made it. He spoke, and then leapt off the moving vehicle, and disappeared from their eyesight, moving at speeds that they would never be able to see for quite a while. Kyoko sighed, knowing that herself and Yuki wouldn't really be of much help. She didn't have any real experience with a gun, and not even the teens she had been helping this last school year had any good experience. It's more than likely we'll only help with bringing bullets up. Or if one of the others needs something. She grimaced after that thought, as Siko readied her new katana. Ray was already armed with a bayonet rifle. Kyoko knew that the orange-haired teen had some experience with that weapon. Mr. Minamoto is a police officer, after all. Of course, young Hirano here. She sweated slightly at seeing the heavy teen carrying quite a bit of weapons and ammo. Siko-san, are you any good with a sidearm? Koda asked. Kyoko watched as the purple-haired sword mistress shrugged. I've never even thought of using a firearm before, was her reply. Kyoko winced slightly, not understanding why the teen wanted to get close to any of them. She noticed that Ray shook her head, but didn't say anything. Though I don't think it will be too difficult, Siko finished. Koda nodded, and flipped the safety to his DMR off. Just make sure the needle of the aiming prongs is no more than a hair's breadth out of line, and be sure to consider that there is a recoil, he said to her, checking his bandolier to make sure he had plenty of ammo. Also keep an ear open for when the gun clicks. That'll mean you're out of bullets, and need to reload. Release for the clip should be just below the trigger guard on the left side. I believe that model uses .9mm ammunition. He finished his brief explanation. Siko nodded, though didn't reach for the sidearm she had grabbed earlier. Her eyes then seemed to turn to ice as the mall got even closer. Kyoko shivered as the temperature seemed to drop, and she could have sworn that the Shinigami was near. Naruto sighed, as he easily snuck into the mall from the roof's lone access for emergency flight for life helicopters. Despite their sonar-type sense of hearing, these things can't pick up a shinobi. Being a former Umbu captain makes this too easy. He really hated the fact that these creatures were not that difficult, unlike the cave he had been in at Germany. That was at least a small challenge. He sighed again when he opened the door leading to the security hallway. His sweat dropped when he saw one of the creatures just staring at the closed door leading to the second floor's open walkway. Walking up behind the female zombie, and watching as it stared at the door, only moving when another shot rang out. He then grabbed the creature by the shoulder and calmly said, while throwing it through a window into the main security room, "Kindly, get out of my way!" He then opened the door, but stopped as a bullet flew in front of his goggles and pierced one of the mob that was shuffling towards the right. He sighed again, as the lone survivor gasped before trying to scream at him to run. Why does everyone in this world think I need to run from a skirmish? He then drew his blade, sidestepped one of the creatures, and sliced through its head, also taking out another 4. He heard the woman stop and gasp again, as he just walked slowly through the mob, slicing and throwing the ones that were getting in the way. He moved towards the lone female officer, though noticed that there were more living, and cowering behind her. Strange. I should have sensed them. He stopped at 10 feet away from the small group of 8 people. One was bleeding though, and looked as though she was about to pass out. He could tell that it wasn't a bite that was making her lose so much blood. Her hand was bandaged, though the gauze was dangerously red. He then turned around and sighed, before sheathing his sword and then getting into a drawing stance. The lone female officer heard him whisper a few words, and they made her shiver. "The morning light will not warm you all anymore. Forgive me." He then took one step, and slashed his sword once, before sheathing the blade slowly. The group of survivors were about to scream at him to run, thinking that he was crazy, until the click of his sword fully resting in its sheath sounded out. All of them gaped as waves of blood arced out through the mob of creatures, many of the things being reduced to ribbons. They couldn't spot the slashes appearing throughout the mob, or that the slashes were comprised of slashes of wind chakra, and brought forth from a void. Nikoka Asami stared at the blonde-haired teen that had appeared before the small group she had been trying to get out of this hell. Ever since her senpai had disappeared to grab supplies that the mall didn't carry, she had been trying to keep this group of scarred civilians from leaving the safety of the mall. She hadn't been able to know that the one they had saved a few hours later was infected. She nearly grimaced at the memory of that one kid going to the restroom, only to not return as a living human. A few hours later, and the mall had been overrun. Many tried to run, by breaking the windows or doors to escape, but that only made the problem bigger. Returning her attention to the boy, she almost screamed at him to run, but watched him decimate the creatures that were in front of them, shivering at the whisper she heard. Her mouth fell open in shock, as did the 7 others that stood behind her. What did Asami just see? The teenager that was behind her gasped, a 15-year-old girl, followed closely by the others. "Well, that takes care of them for a little while." The swordsman spoke. He then grabbed for a shortwave radio from his belt. Pressing the button, he spoke in a clear voice that was filled with an authority that Asami had only heard from her grandfather before. "Hanzo Itie?" He only had to wait for a moment before another voice came from the device. 2 minutes, Taicho. Multiple tangos in the way, Jack, and the others are clearing a path now." The blonde sighed, and pushed his katana out slightly, ready to draw the blade. Speaking once more into the walkie-talkie, he motioned for them to follow. "Acknowledge, get the reckoning to the west exit, hatch open. I have 8 healthy survivors ready for evac." He then turned the device off and turned to them. He paused, as he saw the teenager of the group, but then spoke clearly and calmly. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto, High Battlefield Commander of the Hayabusa. My team, and I, have a vehicle ready to evacuate all 8 of you. Death's reckoning will be here shortly, and we will be leaving from the western exit." He then walked past them, heading towards the stairs. "I suggest that you all follow me. You won't live long once the officer runs out of ammo." He spoke, as he walked away from them at a leisurely pace. He then reached his right arm out into a doorway, and threw one of the creatures off the edge of the second floor, This one had been trying to get through a door frame to get to them. Kagero sighed as the group approached the mall, still wondering if he should really help the young Hayabusa. Can we really fight against him? I may want revenge, but I can't recall why, exactly. I was replaced, but… He sighed again, not knowing if his memories were truthful. He raised his weapon and fired a round at one of them. He then grimaced at a pressure inside of his head. Holding a hand to his forehead, he felt a sudden wave of pain that threw him off balance. What the hell? Why does it feel like I'm forgetting something? The pain went away, and he was able to pick himself up from the railing that he had leaned onto. His face then blanked for a second, before he shook his head as Kota asked if he was all right. I'm fine, he said as he shot another of them, before reloading. He then sighed again, before jumping off of the truck to join Siko as she continued to slice and freeze through the abominations. Naruto sighed as he led the small number of survivors through the mall. This is getting ridiculous. How many of these things are there? He questioned quietly, just before slicing through another one. The 8 that were following gaped at him more than before, because he just kept moving at a leisurely pace while cutting them down. As though they were made of paper. Asami didn't even need to use her firearm anymore, though she kept it ready. She was nervous, gazing at this teenager. She knew what the Hayabusa were, her senpai had told tales of them, and to see that the battlefield commander was in front of them made her want to curl up, hiding from his gaze. She needn't have worried, but she didn't know that. Who is this young man? How can he walk through this hell, as though it were a normal day's stroll in a park? The youngest of the group asked herself. The teen kept gazing at him, and tried to look into his soul. What she saw confused the young girl, who had bright red hair, and was wearing a casual dress. I would stop that if I were you, miss. Gazing into the void will make it stare right back into you, he said for all of them to hear. It made her stop for a moment, wondering how he knew she was trying to read him. You are not the first with abilities to gaze at my soul. What? She then started to follow again, watching as he cut the air again, decimating another group of them. The others around her were scared, wondering just who this person was, and how he had such abilities. He then stopped, forcing them all to freeze again. I was wondering when I would see one of you mutts again. The response to his words was a deep growl that made them even more afraid. When the young girl with psychic abilities and Asami gazed around him, they froze. Before them was a skinned hound. Its eyes seemed to glow silver, and its face didn't have any muscles on it. Just a skull, with eyeballs and a forked tongue that was protruding from fangs that were easily the size of a pocket knife. Its size was nearly 3/4 as tall as he was, with muscles that bulged in tension and power, ready to destroy their flesh and bones. Its growls sounded more like a demon's instead of a dog's. How your kind got out of that cave, I do not know. But I promise you, it will be the last mistake you've ever made, he said before rushing forward at a speed that they could not see. He slid under the beast and kicked its head upward, throwing the beast 20 feet into the air. He then brought his right hand to his mouth in a hand sign. What followed this action made the group even more fearful. He breathed out a flame that was hot enough to make their skin nearly dry up, and there were bright white arches flying out of it. These arches hit the beast first, slicing through its flesh, as well as the bones. The beast yelped in pain, before being overcome by the rest of the technique. It was torn asunder, and then lit on fire, reducing the large beast to ashes. Asami's and the teen's eyes widened, while the rest of the group nearly pissed themselves. As the flames died down, Naruto turned to them. We must move now. We don't have time for fear or questions. He then pulled one of his pistols out and fired at them. The bullet moved past Asami and hit another one of the abominations that had just moved around the corner of a restroom hallway. Move, he said again, causing them all to begin following him once more. They were halfway to the west exit, and they were growing far more afraid of their savior than the abominations that were just like zombies. Hanzo sighed as he watched a few more of them fall. This is getting pretty boring. He then heard Rika's voice through the shortwave radio. Path is clear, driver. Siko just cut down the last few. He grunted before pressing the button to reply. Roger. Keep it that way in the back. Moving to west exit now. He then put the reckoning in reverse, and kept an eye out through the mirrors. He pushed another button, and spoke to Naruto. You copy, boss? He asked, though saw another bright, fiery light in the mirror that was inside of them all. A few moments later, Naruto responded. We are nearing the door. Tell Jack to be prepped, we got some old company joining the party. Hanzo responded, but paused afterwards. Wait a moment. What does he mean by that? He then relayed the message, and Jack sighed before responding. Well, fuck. I'll keep an eye out. Rika, if you see any large-skinned dogs, aim for the neck. Make sure the shot destroys the spine. If any others start showing up, then only the boss can deal with them for right now. Rika responded in an affirmative, and Hanzo raised an eyebrow. Something you not telling us, Jack? Another sigh came from the mummy-like man star. If boss says it's old company, we are more than likely seeing creatures from that damned cave. Hanzo's eyes, as well as everyone else's, widened at that. Naruto fired another round from his black pistol, piercing through the skull of another one of the undead. The group still following him, and getting even more unnerved at his calm demeanor. The teenager of the group of survivors kept glancing at the back of his head, still wondering how he could shield himself from her strange power. It's almost like he has known others with this power. Maybe he... She then approached him after he spoke through his small radio, though it was a few moments after he had roasted another one of those creatures. Excuse me, she began, keeping pace with him, as well as the young officer of the group. I know that you have questions, young lady. You may ask them when we reach the reckoning, where you all will be safe. She nodded, and glanced at Asami. The young officer appeared to be in confusion, and she could tell that Asami was wondering how this teen was a part of the fabled Hayabusa. Maybe there are more like me in this group? They then saw the exit, with only a few of them near it. Naruto stopped and sighed, before seeming to blink out of existence. He then reappeared in the same spot after a second, and continued. The undead in the area suddenly fell into multiple pieces. Not even a glimmer of light could tell anyone how fast he moved, or what sword slice was made first. This made all but the young psychic shiver, and grow even more nervous. They kept moving, knowing that he was at least protecting them from the undead. They approached the door, just as Death's Reckoning backed up with the ramp starting to lower. They also saw a teenage girl with purple hair slicing through another one of them, and noticed that she was wearing an altered schoolgirl outfit. One of the group gasped, recognizing the girl, and her husband squinted to see better. Busujima-san! Was exclaimed in a whisper. The group then exited the mall, but Naruto stopped. Siko-chan. Please get these people inside, and have Shizuku-chan look at this young lady's hand. I have a few nuisances to deal with. He then turned back into the mall, while Siko nodded. He gave one last command to Rika, before disappearing fully into the building. Make sure the secondary barracks is open for our new guests, and tell Hanzo to go ahead to the outskirts of the city. I'll be along shortly. Siko frowned, before noticing Rika give her a nod to follow him. She then did so, before noticing Rei and Saya moving with her. Rei's eyes had a burning determination in them, and Saya's appeared resolute. Soichiro frowned, as he saw his daughter follow Siko, along with Rei. He turned his gaze to his wife, and noticed her smiling slightly. May I ask for the reason you're joyful? You do realize that she could die in there, correct? His wife glanced at him, and responded. She is in love, Soichiro-kun. She is a big girl, and can handle herself. He grimaced at that, or at least that is what Hanzo thought. Damn it! Was his only response, though it was quiet enough for only his wife to hear. She smirked at him, and placed her hands on his cheeks and giggled. Are you so distraught that you can't play the standard father card, my love? She smirked as he sweated a little. No. But he could easily lose me my job, he said for those around him to hear. Hanzo chuckled, while Jack entered the bridge. Nah, the boss won't do that. He'd rather throw you into the sun, instead of playing some cloak and dagger shit to make your family lose pay, Jack said, which made everyone glance at him. Even the recently arrived Kagero raised an eyebrow. "Are you telling me that he has a shuttle capable of flying close enough to the sun?" Mira asked the mummy-like man, still feeling like she knew him from somewhere. "Nope. He can literally throw you, hard and fast enough, to fly into the sun. He could, also very likely, blow up half of the earth. With only a snap of his fingers." This made them look at him, as though he were crazy, all except for Hanzo. "He's got a point," the driver said. Mira turned to Hanzo, and skeptically asked what the others were thinking after those words. "What, is he a god or something?" Rika entered the bridge while she asked that, and chuckled. "If not a god, then he is the closest thing to one," was her response, before she turned to Jack. "The survivors have been placed in the secondary barracks, while the youngest is being checked by Shizuka. Cut her hand on glass, apparently. No bite marks." The gunner nodded, and turned to leave the bridge. He didn't notice how the newest members of the group were looking at them with widened eyes. Mira frowned, and looked to Rika. "How is it possible for one man to hold such power?" she asked the sniper. Rika shrugged, before answering with another query. "How is it possible for the dead to return to life, only to feed on the living?" Rika then turned to Hanzo, as he started to drive out of the mall's parking area. "There are many questions that neither humans or science can explain. All we know is that Naruto has seen the end once before. War destroyed his home, and it was against someone who tried to bring hell onto the battlefield." She then turned away from them, heading back towards the secondary barracks, on the other side of Death's Reckoning. "He is the only known survivor," she said in parting. Naruto walked towards the hallway that would lead to the first-floor security and maintenance center. He almost stopped, but kept walking with a sigh. "You three. You should have stayed with the others," he spoke, just loud enough for the three girls to hear. They turned the corner to the hallway he was heading towards, and kept following him. "We aren't leaving, Naruto-kun. We decided to follow you, even if you go walking through hell," Saya huffed, after saying that. Rei and Siko nodded, waiting for him to either tell them to go back, or let them go with him. Saya narrowed her eyes, thinking that he would make them go back, but widened them when he just shrugged. "Don't say that I didn't warn you. We will be heading into the maintenance tunnels. It will be extremely dark, and could contain things far worse than them. So be ready." He almost grimaced at allowing them to follow, but put any feelings aside. He knew that he might need their help, if what he thought was correct. They continued for a few moments, before Naruto stopped, and sighed. "Keep your heads in the game, and don't try to fight everything down there. Move calm, and as quiet as possible. No need to waste energy with the standard grunts of this pandemic. If we find any of the other enemies, let me deal with them." He then moved again, turning down a hallway that was labeled as security and maintenance. The three girls nodded, though Saya raised an eyebrow. "What other enemies?" she asked, as Naruto slapped one of the undead into a door handle. Its head caved in from the action, which made Saya and Rei grimace. Naruto sighed again, and stepped around one that was trying to get inside of the camera room. The noise from that room was attracting it, and he wouldn't waste energy. "Saw two, same as the low levels from that cave. It's been a little while, but I recognize them. Large, almost horse-sized, skinless dog appearance. They are stronger than most humans, faster than a track runner, but just as stupid as these things." He backhanded another of the undead. Saya frowned, but listened. "They have low-level instincts, almost like a caged wild and feral animal. They aren't very intelligent, but are smart enough to recognize when something is better than them." He sliced through a group of 3 zombies that were moving towards them. Siko smirked slightly at the 3 falling into multiple pieces from one attack, a blush beginning to form on her face. The 4 continued down the hallway, a few turns here and there, before coming to a door that was locked. This door was surrounded by a larger group of the undead. Rei tensed as she recognized one of them. "Mrs. Yuki." Naruto grimaced at her tone, recognizing the sadness as a type of survivor's guilt. He sighed before whispering to her, a small amount of comfort, but mainly a command. "The only thing we can do for them now is to put their souls to rest. Take the shot, Ray. We'll deal with the others. Ray hesitated for a moment, but nodded and raised her rifle. Her arms slightly shook, and the sight of the weapon jumped with the movement. The barrel was also shaking. She sighed before her arms stopped, and focused on her breathing. A few seconds after, she pulled the trigger. Despite the bullet moving near the speed of sound, it appeared to be slow to her. The flash was not accompanied by a roar, the weapon was silent. Yet Ray still imagined the ring of a bell, announcing to the world that someone was dying. The others didn't notice her turmoil, as the bullet pierced through the undead woman's skull, and blew rotten flesh and gray matter all over the door. Naruto and Siko moved, both slicing through the undead, while Saya readied her own pistol. The creatures were made quick work of, and only 3 more shots were fired into the small number of enemies. Saya's pistol was louder than Ray's weapon, but was still silent enough to not attract any more from beyond the hallway. Naruto nodded, and turned to Ray. She was nearly as still as a statue, as her arms were shaking again. Her breathing was quick and short, while her eyes were wide yet glazed. Naruto sighed, and approached her. Ray-chan, he whispered, as he put his hand on her shoulder to offer support. He grimaced as he noticed her only tensing more, and fell to her knees with tears flowing like a river. I knew her. As she was a single mother, that lived down the street from us. Ray's gasping rose a bit in speed, and her shaking picked up slightly. Her daughter went to the school that Takashi's mom works at. Saya looked down at her words, and clenched her teeth. She remembered Kakashi, and still hated that their childhood friend had died. Ray continued, ignoring the others. As she was kind, and helped when my father was nearly fired for investigating the Shido F family. I was held back a year from that asshole's son. As Shido-sensei was a vile man. Naruto nodded, as did Saya, while he squeezed her shoulder slightly. Ray-chan. He spoke, in a tone that he remembered his own sensei once used for a civilian. You don't need to worry or be distraught. I'll make sure that it never happens again. I cannot stop others from falling in this sickness once infected, but I will ensure that our group makes it through this. He then kneeled, to look her in the eyes, and took his goggles off. His eyes made her gasp. One being a bluish purple, and the other a glowing crimson. The other 2 also gasped, but they could tell that his eyes were conveying a warm promise to them all. Ray then hugged him, after a moment of gazing into his eyes. I still believe, that he killed Takashi-kun. I am grateful, that you ended him. And Naruto-kun, please promise me. Promise me that you won't die. Ray's voice was muffled, as it was spoken into the coat he wore, but they could still hear her desperation. Naruto sighed quietly, and wrapped his arms around her. His eyes gazing at the other 2, who had moved behind her at the start of this small episode. His eyes glowed brighter when he spoke again. I cannot promise that I won't die at some point. He felt Ray grasp him tighter, but did not wince. But I promise you all, that there is nothing that can stop me right now, from living for you all. Ray grasped him even tighter after his words, and the other 2 could see his resolute determination. They knew that he wouldn't break his word, or that anything could make him break this promise. Saya and Siko both blushed from his gaze and his words. They felt a warmth coming from their hearts, and Siko's new blade glowed slightly. It felt like he was speaking directly into their souls, and Ray finally looked up from her spot against his chest. He turned his gaze to hers once more, and smiled. She felt her face heat up at the sight of this small smile. She then forced her own mouth onto his, and held his own in an intimate caress. It was desperate, and he could tell that she needed it. The other 2 nearly growled, but could also feel that it was needed. Saya frowned, but also felt a heat rise in her lower abdomen. The kiss lasted for a few more seconds, before Ray pulled away from the blonde. Her eyes were clear now, though there were still a few tears in them. Her breathing was calmer as well, and her cheeks were flushed slightly. I love you, she tried to convey through her eyes, as well as seeing if he would keep his promise. Naruto nodded to her, and then stood up. Let's get this over with, and get out of this hellhole. He spoke, while his eyes said that all of them would talk later. A being chuckled in the darkness. The room it sat in was pitch black, the walls were made of dirt, and the chair it sat on was made of the bones of many people that tried to survive in the mall above it. The being's breathing was ragged, and sounded almost like a dying person. Its chuckle was low and dark. "Let us see if you are still strong enough to cause us fear. Uzumaki, the last time we saw each other, you put the fear of death into me. Can you still do that?" The voice sounded like an elder woman that was on the edge of death. The being then cackled, while staring at the doorway it had dug out for the person it wanted to meet. "Come, Uzumaki. Come, and delve back into the darkness you nearly destroyed. You couldn't lock us away forever. All you can do now is try to destroy us." It cackled once more, as a few of the other creatures growled, before heading towards the halls of dirt. The group paused after entering the door. "That isn't in the plans for this mall," Saya spoke, as they gazed at a large hole in the floor. The foundation was carved out to make a tunnel, and the only visible part was just at the beginnings of the dirt, due to the light from the mall's backup generator. "No. It was carved out by the same creatures I warned you of before. You can see the claw marks in the foundation stone," Naruto responded, and pointed out the marks he spoke of. "Use your flashlights, if you have them, and be wary. These beings are from before humankind. They are basically the same types of monster you would see from tales of ancient Greece and Rome. Creatures that only the best of Sparta, or demigods, could slay." Saya raised an eyebrow, while Siko started to grin, and Ray's sweat dropped. "Are you telling us that those stories were real? Hercules and others?" Saya asked. "Yes. Those stories were true, to a certain extent. Hercules and a few others were the last children of the Greek pantheon. The true last child of a deity, however, was Jesus Christ himself. Ever since his crucifixion, the gods of every religious pantheon have agreed to never produce more demigods in this world. They have even agreed to never interfere with this world," Naruto responded. "However, because of this, these creatures were able to escape their prison. Because the gods have taken their power from this world, these things were able to escape." He then sighed, grimacing at the words he spoke next. "The goddess that has only ever been called Kami-sama decided to break this rule, and called me here to try and save this world. Unfortunately, she couldn't give out details at the time." Saya's eyes widened halfway through his explanation, and only got wider before the end of it. "What? Is he being serious?" she mentally screamed, feeling as if everything she had studied about recent history was a lie. "Wait, if they are true, then what happened to the bodies?" "Naruto-kun, if what you said is true, then did all of the corpses of the demigods go to their religion's heavens?" she asked, hoping that they wouldn't have to face an undead demigod. Naruto paused, and grimaced again. "Not all of them. The biggest sets of the ones who didn't were from Greece, Rome, China, and Japan. Christianity had only one fall, but it wasn't Jesus. His name was Reynard Brenningfield, and he was European in origin. His mother was a devout follower of the god known as Yahweh, or Jehovah as some prefer." He broke the rule about more offspring 3 times. The first was a damper who went on to create the most famous vampire hunter family. The second went on to become a pope. The final, however, was a set of twins. He paused for a few seconds. They were named Wang and Reynard. They were born at the end of 1989, to a Jennifer Brenningfield. Wang went on to follow his father's path. Reynard, however, fell into the same trap that all divine twins do. One will become the hope and light of a certain path, while the other will fall into darkness and become a monster. He is now known as Rei. Saya gulped slightly, before she moved toward the tunnel. The others followed her, and Rei turned on the flashlight that was mounted to her rifle. Naruto, however, pulled a scroll out of his belt, and from it, summoned a torch that he lit with a small application of fire-natured chakra. "This is where we walk into the darkness, and we fight against monsters that haven't been seen for hundreds of years outside of one village and 2 people. Do be careful, you 3. I smell something that I never liked since I met it," Naruto warned them. "Let's go." Chapter end.
Now watch daily exclusive uncensored lemon stories and mature content, along with NSFW images, featuring harem girls characters from the fics. Access all this and more on my Patreon. Click the link in the description to explore.